Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. The usual ragtag and bobtail bunch of misfits, plus Kyle from Skydio. And we're all quite excited. We've been chatting just before we started, and the main issue with this is we all really like the Skydio R1, so we're not going to be able to rip into him too much. I did notice that the price has gone down, so that's a positive thing. $500 off, $19.99. It says he's gone wide-eyed. Maybe he hasn't picked that up on the website, but I'm sure it says $19.99. And you've had a firmware update, so maybe we could start with that firmware update.
Yeah, so generally speaking, when we talk about the update, which we have been referring to it as kind of the car follow update because that's the biggest feature that kind of came with it. But we're typically staying away from the use of the word firmware and using more so software, because we really think that firmware, people tend to associate that with like updating a gadget like a drone from one of our competitors, and it doesn't necessarily bring new capabilities. It eliminates bugs that maybe were edge cases that you experienced, but it's not a clear I did this download, now my drone does this for me. Besides the things now and then, like now you can update firmware from mobile, something that substantially changes the user experience in that way. So Skydio R1, the idea is that we've made a flying computer. In order to design it from the ground up for autonomy, we had to give it a bunch of cameras. It's got 13, 2 facing every direction, so that we get depth and we make a 3D map. But with all of that, making a 3D map, planning a route through that 3D map of the environment to get good footage, you need like a lot of compute. That's why we've got the NVIDIA TX1. It's something with a substantial graphics processing unit rather than one of the kind of low-end chips that you'd find in most other drones, just because we're designing for something really different. So because we've got this flying computer, we can have updates like what we just put out with Car Follow, which is, it's been 3 months since we launched our product. It was mid-February when R1 came out, and we brought changes to multiple aspects of the experience. Car Follow, we took the same recognizing things in the environment using deep learning and then predicting their movement to follow them. We took that, which it could do for people, and now it can do that for cars. And that shows that we can introduce entirely new capabilities using machine learning. Other things that we did include an improved lead mode, where it's anticipating your movement. In lead mode, it tries to basically stay in front of you because it knows, like, okay, they're turning this much. This is what in front of them will be a couple of seconds in the future from now. With improved lead mode, we basically made it so that it will anticipate obstacles behind it much better, and based on real world circumstances we saw, create a better route through that space so that it doesn't basically get itself stuck by trying to do anything too naive. It's a lot smarter about giving itself a route past the next spot that it's going to. And we also introduced a new user interface into the mobile app to control R1, where because we're introducing all these new cinematic modes, we introduced ones that feel like kind of tiny ones, like quarter follow, quarter lead, where it's filming you from a quarter profile. We basically changed the interface to make it easier to see all the different cinematic modes available and understand what each of them will do for you and make it easy to switch between them. And so it's this like new capabilities, smarter packaging of existing capabilities, and then figuring out, okay, as we're making this thing an increasingly like one button and it does these incredible things for you experience, making it so that you don't get overwhelmed as you're trying to pick between those buttons that you could press to get cool footage for yourself. So basically, to boil it all down, like, this is a very software-defined experience, and I think that's something that people are going to be surprised by over the next year, is how rapidly we push out substantial changes to Skydio products, and how much of that is based on just software. A lot of a lot of product categories, drones included in electronics, it's kind of like a huge step change happens when you go from one generation of hardware to the next. That'll be the case because, like everywhere else, we're going to get better processors, better cameras, in the same way that smartphone makers do. But between now and then, there's going to be improvements to core flight algorithms, new cinematic modes, where someone who buys an R1 early 2019 is going to get a much better product than someone who bought Skydio R1 early 2018. And that's something where, you hear with computers, you expect that. With your phone, with your desktop, you kind of expect that because we've been trained to have that for, a couple decades now. You get improvements via this, every couple of months, some update. But it's only now with things like Tesla and their cars that we're starting to see this for other categories of products, where you buy this box and then the software keeps improving and it starts to feel like a different product, even though the hardware hasn't changed. And I think that's kind of like what we want people to take away from this update is it's one update that represents kind of a deeper roadmap to come.
So Kyle, go ahead, Gary.
No, after you.
Basically, what you guys are doing is just processing and do path planning for moving targets, right?
So today, that's how a lot of our cinematic modes work, is we recognize where a person is, and then we basically, the motion planning of the drone is based on predicting what the person it's following will do as far as 4 seconds into the future. And we guess that far into the future because it's actually, even that part, the motion prediction, is based on deep learning. And so we feed in data from all of our previous flights. And so we know when I see this is what people tend to do. And so that's right. We're basically constantly figuring out what the plan is for how it will fly based on what the thing it's filming is doing.
So no way of, for instance, recognizing an object and build, for instance, something that is very dear to industrial users, to reconstruct an object or a structure using motion from the drone. So if you go to, for instance, Pix4D, you do path planning manually and do a flight that surveys a structure, and then you get the 3D model of that offline. So
that's done via photogrammetry, where you take lots of photos from different poses and reconstruct the scene. And maybe you're given perspective info. Maybe you have to work that out for yourself in software. So the way we talk about it is, well, if you look at the Skydio website and a lot of the press coverage we've gotten so far, it's these very consumer, prosumer focused marketing points, features that we announce. Obviously, like car follow is not something that industry is expecting too much from their drones. With that said, we think that the kind of autonomy that we've built is kind of the key to making friction-free experiences for consumers, making basically drones more of a mass market product category. But on the enterprise side, we think it's basically required to make things scale to a much greater extent than they have so far. Companies don't necessarily want to bring in like a contracted pilot on a regular basis so much as they'd love this camera system in a box that launches every day or every couple of days, gathers the imagery that they need, doesn't hit things, doesn't hurt other work processes, workflows. They want something that kind of invisibly captures those images. And we, while it's not something that we're showing off today, assume that like our way of thinking and our kind of overall roadmap of what value we're going to deliver includes, industrial, commercial applications where you're scanning structures, the indoors of areas. That's something where we think we're uniquely advantaged. The fact that we fly using computer vision alone and GPS is kind of a last ditch fallback for us means that operating near cell phone towers where you've got EMF coming off and throwing off GPS, operating indoors where you don't have GPS, that's something that we're going to be able to handle just fine that are really tricky for other solutions today.
So we can expect an R2 or R5 drone that will gather more the commercial and industrial side of the industry, right?
So I'd say that generally, like we think a lot of how the drone landscape is going to transform, and feel free to push back because I get that quite a bit, but I think that we're going to see a transition from like workstations to something more akin to laptops, to use an analogy, where these kind of high-end, take a matrice, strap a giant sensor onto it, point it at what you need, manually. It's going to change more to we're collecting way more imagery from way more devices, operating way more frequently, and kind of the advantages that come with that frequency of operation, how easy it is to do it, will make up for the fact that you're not necessarily operating with a LiDAR sensor array that costs 110 grand, or a massive like 100 megapixel camera system. Now there will still be use cases for that, and honestly, I think we're at a point where we could say like maybe there will be a Skydio platform that does accommodate those kinds of workflows as well. I think that it's a possibility, but right now we're kind of focused on the where are there areas where we can unlock a ton of value by introducing reliable autonomy more so than specific high-end sensor payloads.
So how small can you go on the Skydio? At the moment you're running the TX1, which is a very large board and requires a lot of real estate to be run, and I believe
you gotta cool it off
a bit, and runs a bit hot because they usually do, right? And how low does your algorithms can go, or how high?
Yeah, so I'll say that.
Sorry, I was just watching today's announcement of NVIDIA, that new board they've released with enhanced capacity.
Yeah, that's a little higher end. Maybe we'll put that on a future flying car or something. When it comes to kind of the personal drone, again, this thing that we're going to make more powerful but smaller. You know, we want this to be something that people feel comfortable putting in the tiny bag they take with them to the beach, or, you know, their purse. And so I'm going to steal a line that I really like from Kis Anderson, the founder of 3DR. He talked about how things like drones or virtual and augmented reality were benefiting from the peacetime dividends of the smartphone wars. Basically, components are getting more capable, less power hungry, smaller, because of all the investments going into improving smartphones as a category and kind of the areas adjacent to them. You know, as AR, VR take off, you're going to get more investment in those chipsets specifically for that. And if you look at those areas, especially things like AR, which are getting really hot, you know, they need to, like, the Magic Leap 1 has 8 cameras and needs to process a lot of imagery in real time and run 3D objects on top of that. The tech stack doesn't look that dissimilar to what we're building. And so the way we think about it is, you know, thanks to Moore's law, basically, we're going to keep getting better, smaller, more power efficient components, basically for free. Obviously, you know, we're still going to be paying for, you know, supply as we build up new generations of things, but for the same amount of spend, we're going to get much more capable components. And that's where the entire ecosystem is going to get that. And so the thing that's important to remember is, again, the software that we have running on top of it, and the fact that today we've got autonomy working, and we're going to be doing interesting things where, okay, you've got working autonomy where you don't hit stuff. Now what's cool creative tools you can build on top of that? Other people are going to get advanced processors. It's going to be cheaper to put a bunch of cameras on drones, but they're going to be behind on the software.
Yeah, and we know that some companies already use the Movidio style chips on their drones. And although the promise is there, the result is not. You guys are the first guys that present a viable anti-collision follow me system that with all the path planning and path prediction, I would say it's path planning and path prediction of the drone.
Yeah, and a lot of that, frankly, comes down to the fact that we're integrated, that, you know, like Apple, we're building the hardware along with the software, and the development of one informs the other, where if you're bolting on a Movidius and something that looks like a Microsoft Kinect onto a standard airframe, there's a lot more to go before you've got a reliable experience that provides a lot of value for you. You need to put a lot of thought into what user experience do people expect, how could you break those expectations and deliver something that's even better than they, you know, kind of saw. And if you're just working on the sensor payload, you're not going to know about the vehicle it might be on. And if you're just working on the chipset, you might not know about the real world conditions to expect. And we're basically, you know, our strength comes from the fact that, you know, a couple of years ago, it's kind of luck that we decided, you know, we're not going to make autonomy that bolts onto something else. We're going to make this integrated device. You know, we could have gone down a different path. Some of it is luck that we made that decision.
Yeah, and good luck with that, because you guys made it right. You guys took the right choice, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's something where the market was running a bunch of different experiments, and we chose a path that was fortuitous.
Well, I think there's going to be a little bit more to it than that. And what I'm quite keen to know is why did you decide to stick your heads above the parapet now? Because there's a fantastic bit of video. Dear viewer, if you haven't seen, go to their website. Now, I can't remember which page it's under, but there's an aircraft flying in a garage an underground car park. I don't know what Americans call it.
Yeah, that's on the about page. Yep.
It's on the about page, and that's quite
Yes.
extraordinary. Now, before we started, you said that was 10 years ago, Carl.
Yeah, that's right. So two of the co-founders here at Skydio, Adam Bree, our CEO, and Abe Backrack, our CTO, they met at MIT CSAIL, which is a research lab at MIT famous for robotics and drones, where they were specifically working on making drones that could operate in GPS-denied conditions. So, and before that, actually, this is a fun detail, Adam Bree grew up doing RC flying competitions. He's a world-class pilot. So this is kind of like a lifelong passion for these founders. They went from this as their core focus in research to they were the founding team at Project Wing, Google X's group that working on delivery drones. They led core flight algorithm development there, and it's kind of a story you hear a lot from these kinds of technical founders where they spin out, they leave Google after some time. They wanted to move faster. They wanted to, be more ambitious. They wanted to make the tech for not just delivery, but all applications of drones. So, when you see what we've got today, it really is, it's not based on the code of that fixed wing drone in the garage, but, the insight of what's needed to build something like this and understanding of, what lines of technological development might make these things work much better. They had the right backgrounds to have those insights.
It's a long time. 10 years is a long time to not stick your head up and come up with them. We actually have our expert here for generating renderings. Bruce is there. He's also an expert on, funnily enough, AI, Bruce chain, and all other manner of technologies. And he
Bruce
can make
chain,
it.
I love that.
Yeah, Bruce chain. Yeah, Bruce chain. But other companies would have knocked up a rendering and got it out there and made up a load of stories. You guys landed, pun intended, with a working product that's impressed the socks off an awful lot of industry people. That's a very brave point to start, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, you look at examples of, I could beat around the bush about this, but, you look at something like Lilly, where they raised tens of millions of dollars. And, one could argue that, even a couple of years ago, the tech we had was real and theirs unfortunately wasn't. And maybe we should have just gone up then with a Kickstarter and raised a couple tens of millions of dollars. But I think that there's a deep kind of ethos here at Skydio to build real things, ship real things, not hype things up or oversell, but get something working and then show it to the world, make it available.
You're in the wrong industry. Wrong industry.
So
you can't do that in this industry.
So you're
wrong
under
industry.
promising and over delivering. That's
shocking behavior.
That's the goal. That's the goal. And so, yeah, I mean, the company was founded 2014. I'd say that we decided to go kind of down the path that resulted in R1 about 3 years ago. And so, yeah, the thinking was we're not going to do the Silicon Valley thing of showing something 6-9 months ahead of time and saying this is going to be great, trust us. That doesn't tend to work out that well besides the initial hype that people get. And I think that you're going to see the same thing from us now. We're not, doing the, Elon style, here's the Skydio master plan, here's a bunch of promises, we'll try to keep some of them. I think we're going to try to continue to surprise and delight with actual amazing radical changes to what we've already got out there. And so, you asked earlier, like, why ship now? And a big part of it is we got it to the point where autonomy works. But as we said earlier, the fact that we're so much a software-defined experience means that it was really valuable to us to get real-world use. Once we knew that we wouldn't hit stuff, put it in people's hands, figure out how they're using it, their expectations of what it can do, and use that to inform the software roadmap where we can move really quickly at giving people things that they would find valuable.
And can you ship enough units? I believe you guys have an empty warehouse.
So I'll say, we basically the only line I can give on sales is sales continue to outpace our ability to make units.
That's what
we
I
make
was
them here in Redwood City. And we've got something like an 11-day, I think a week and a half expected ship orders. So good problems when orders
Yeah,
continue
that's
to have
a wonderful problem to have.
Yeah, but with that said, I'd say we're getting more confident about that. Growing our manufacturing capabilities internally has been a big focus. And so, you talked about briefly, Gary, at the beginning of the call, the fact that we just cut the price temporarily from $2,500 to $19.99 as part of a Father's Day promotion. Part of that is we think we'll be able to keep up with the demand from the promotion. We really want to get R1 into as many people's hands as possible. A big part of that is because, again, so much of how R1 works now is informed by machine learning and deep learning that improves with more data. We let people opt in to sending us training data back from their drone after flying. And because a lot of the people who buy R1 today are kind of the early adopter types, they almost want to feel like they're part of the Skydio story and helping improve the tech. A lot of people opt into sending us that data. And so, the more people have it, the more data we collect, the fewer issues people are going to experience in the real world, and the better, future drone platforms will do as well.
So, Kyle, basically what you're saying is theoretically, two Skydio R1s can behave differently one from the other, if one has one more than the other.
The learning doesn't happen on device. I can break that down a little bit more. So a little bit of learning does happen on the device as it flies, and that comes down to recognizing people in the environment. Basically, as we fly, we collect details about the people that it sees. We don't save them for further use, but on device in real time, it's basically figuring out like, oh, this person has this haircut and is wearing this outfit. This person next to him, person B, is wearing shorts instead of pants, and they've got an entirely different hairstyle. And we basically visually fingerprint people so that R1 can follow the right person that the user intended and doesn't get confused. But we don't save that for later. That doesn't go to other drones. In terms of overall flight performance, that kind of feedback loop I talked about earlier, where we get training data from our users and then we improve the capabilities of devices, that training happens in the cloud, off device, and then when we push updates to drones that people can download via the mobile app, like we did last week with Car Follow, that's when we kind of push those newly trained models to devices. So it's not so much that drones are always improving or one would be better than the other. It's more so with each software update, you're getting kind of the learnings from the entire crowd of people that decided to opt into sending data.
I'm asking this because on that video that you guys have two drones flying simultaneously.
Yeah, we try to do that in quite a few of our videos, yeah.
And they behave differently, and you can see the pattern of behavior of one drone is a bit different from the other.
Yeah,
the way they transition and all that.
Yeah, so I can briefly explain, where that's coming from. Basically, we don't actually have our drones communicate with one another while they're flying, filming the same subject. Yeah. Not today. Yet we still, in our videos, like our launch video, we show pretty elaborate shots that look like collaboration. And basically what's happening is they're both following the same persons, but with different constraints. And so using the interface that we have in the app that lets you zoom out or change heights, we basically set the drone filming the drone in front of it a little bit further back. And so what it's doing is, and maybe we set it at a slightly different angle. And so they're both looking at the same movement data and they're both looking at the same environment, and basically just trying to be a different distance from the subject while they're moving through that scene leads to different flight paths that don't collide with each other. And the reason the behavior looks different is you just have to make different adjustments to your path depending on if you're trying to weave your way through the environment really close to the subject, or if you're further back and maybe a bit up, you're just going to take slightly different routes.
Okay, so it's all based on the constraints that you set up on the app.
That's right. It's not the drones themselves running different software. It's the user saying, hey, I want you to do this drone A to do one thing, and I want drone B to do something different. And so the behavior then changes correspondingly.
So when can we expect to see a demo of 1,500 Skydio R1s doing a figure in the air?
Very topical. I love that transition. If someone wants to, for a 2020 Olympics, put up that many Skydio R1s, I will not fight them in the slightest. We'll be happy to accommodate an order of that size.
Well,
yeah.
Well, that
And
leads.
plus we've got. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, but that just leads. You said that with such confidence, as if to suggest, yeah, we could do that. Just buy them.
Yep.
Especially, well, honestly, yeah. Not to push back against that too much. Basically, once we release some of the things that I was hinting at earlier with addressing commercial and industrial uses, yeah, I think it would be possible to do something like those coordinated drone light shows with R1.
But do the drones have the capability built in to talk to each other?
So that's something that would not be that difficult to release via a software update, but it's not currently something running on device. Generally speaking, this is a premium device. Most people aren't going to buy two. Most people aren't going to run into another Skydio owner and have the ability to do any of those kind of coordinated shows anytime soon. In the future, it's definitely interesting. Like, there's a reason, like the fact that we find that kind of drone on drone footage compelling is probably indicative of something other people are going to want to do in the future. And V2V communication, vehicle to vehicle, would make sense for that, but it's not something we're doing today.
No, I mean, does the hardware have the capabilities to talk to another drone, not going via the ground station, but like directly to each other?
Theoretically, there's nothing kind of as part of the Wi-Fi communication stack that would limit that.
Okay.
And what about getting out of the way of any? Well, I presume it gets out of the way of anything it sees. So, if an aircraft or helicopter, actually, did you see that helicopter crash video, Bruce? That's another subject, maybe later. At the road race thing. But yeah, I presume it will get out of the way. And then what about unmanned traffic management systems fitting in with standard aviation? Any special tools or toys for that?
So today, just to address the first point, we don't actually let the user operate such that they'd be flying R1 near flying aircraft. And partially that's a technical constraint actually that we turn into a positive. The fact that we're communicating with it over standard off-the-shelf Wi-Fi from your phone means you don't want your drone to go several hundred feet in the air just in case some interference happened and you weren't able to tell your drone to come back down. So we limit actually R1 to 20 meters above the user. That's about 60 feet. Obviously, if you're at a high altitude, like you could imagine putting yourself in a situation where it's like technically in a height where vehicles would fly, but you're probably also like hiking and close to a mountain and there's no aircraft flying anywhere near you. So we're trying, basically there's a bunch of technical reasons why that's something that we're not really directly addressing just yet. With that said, a lot of these things for aircraft management, very quickly knowing where you are, reporting to towers that you're about to do a flight, very quickly getting confirmation. We think all of that is the future, especially as, if you look forward, seems like some point, not too distant future, like a lot of the, let's say DJI Mavic Air, Mavic Pro and higher tier devices there's going to at least be SKUs that have 5G connections in the next couple of years. Like that doesn't seem unreasonable to guess. And so I think that there's a lot of reason to think that, those systems should be more built out. I think that, we think about Skydio R1 and its level of autonomy as basically taking away friction and, uncertainty about what you're supposed to do as a pilot or as an operator. And so in the same way that we tell the user that it's too windy to fly R1 because we can detect that, or that it's too dark because the cameras that we use to navigate are basically smartphone cameras, and if it would be difficult to take a good-looking photo from your smartphone, it'll have trouble flying. We'll tell you that and not let you fly at night. And I think that as those kind of air traffic control systems become more common, and pilots kind of expect some kind of integration with that, will make smart decisions that people will appreciate as kind of default behaviors about not letting you mess up.
And is this, so are you in this vision-based AI, all the other buzzwords are going to drop in now, is that level of technology at a place where Moore's law is certainly going to help kick it along for a little while longer? Because certainly in the desktops and mainframes and that sort of thing, people are beginning to say Moore's law is beginning to run out of steam. Bruce might have an opinion on that. But is there enough stretch in what's coming? Is that evolving fast enough to make some really exciting systems?
Yeah, so if you look at kind of general purpose central processing units, Intel's bread and butter, improvements year over year in terms of especially single core performance have been pretty disappointing. It's just not the rate of, even when I was a kid, and I'm a pretty young guy, I remember being able to every couple of years, upgrade, basically buy a new CPU and motherboard combo and have a huge upgrade to your desktop computer. And it's just not really the case anymore. On mobile, things haven't quite slowed down as much, especially in Apple land, because they're doing so much, again, this tightly integrated software and hardware. They can make chip components that address specific needs they have at the OS level. I think for things like us, where we're running lots of deep learning or other tasks that can be run in parallel, or, the path planning, building the map of the environment, that lends itself to running on GPUs. It lends itself to running on dedicated chip architectures meant for those kinds of calculations. And so between NVIDIA and their investments in GPUs bolted on to ARM processors and things like Movidius, there's a huge set of companies making other dedicated components that would fit onto a system on a chip, dedicated low power processors for specific elements of computer vision. Between all of those things happening, the investment going into all of that, I'd say that there's a lot of room to grow on the hardware front to improve these things. But at the same time, what I think is maybe a little bit hard to grasp is the fact that a lot of it's going to come down to algorithmic improvements. It's going to come down to improvements to how we generate the data that we use to train these systems. If you look, Google just announced this thing called Auto Augment, where it basically will take the data set of images that you have that are already labeled and modify them automatically by taking numbers and letters and inverting the colors and stretching and rotating pictures of dogs and cats. All of these things that by taking the same image and modifying it a little bit, you actually train the model on a slightly different variation, basically eliminating another edge case. Those kinds of improvements to kind of the deep learning stack overall are going to lead to a lot of improvements, where for the same amount of compute, we're just going to get a lot of more bang for our buck when it comes to AI. And that end, just there seems to be no limit, in academia when it comes to small improvements to architecture, discoveries of new architectures of things like neural networks that, it's kind of hard to anticipate what's going to come. But if you look at just the set of releases over the last couple of years, it feels like it's going to continue. Like there's still some gas in the tank to, again, for the same amount of compute, for the same cameras, get more out of what you've already got on device.
So
on all of those fronts, I anticipate improvements.
So we can expect some FPGA, some custom built single board computers, not the TX1 for future models, more dedicated to your purposes, or are you still going to go with off-the-shelf components like the TX1?
Projecting that too far out, it's hard for me to say, because it is going to be something where you're designing for a specific form factor of device and constraints and what software you think is going to run on it. So it's hard to say, 4 years from now, what chipset we'll use. With that said, I'd say that to the extent possible, we want to be a software company, not a hardware company. We want to, again, kind of ride the wave of these improvements, and the easiest way to do that is with off-the-shelf components. So I think in the near term, using components like the Tegra X1, but with more power efficient, more compute overheads, so that we can do interesting things that we aren't able to do now. In the near term or medium term, we'll probably end up using things that look like the Tegra X1. Harder to predict further out what kinds of architectures will make sense to use based on what's available, what constraints we have.
So perhaps 3D vision or 360 vision with 4K cameras all around, replacing some of the other 13 cameras?
That's something where I'm not going to promise anything on a roadmap, but it's really interesting to think about the improvements to the autonomy you get with higher resolution cameras, the interesting new content creation kind of possibilities. One of the things that's exciting with, for instance, 360-degree cameras is things that Rilo and GoPro are doing with their cameras, where you're filming 4K, but then you can pull out a 1080 kind of window that looks like a traditional video, but you get to choose that 1080 window after the fact. And so you just you can imagine a future drone that's flying through an area, and then you pick
grabbing off.
Which angle was interesting after the fact.
Yes. Yeah, that's very much that's been in my. So you're not doing this drone game right. You've got to have a completely BS roadmap as well. Come on, you're not. We don't know how to work with you really. But no, that's always been in my head, that we'd get to that point where we wouldn't have a gimbal. We'd have some sort of 360 arrangement that caught everything as it went. So there must be lots of people knocking on the door of your company now. Everyone that wants to build a flying taxi, a flying car, they're all going to need this. And then the algorithms you develop for tracking people, I guess they're going to be of use in towns and cities for other things as well, and even on autonomous cars on the ground. Are you constraining yourselves by playing in the flying market, or is that on your non-existent roadmap?
Honestly, that's a really good question. And I think that, again, can't speak to a roadmap, but in the same way that DJI, they make great stabilization rigs, they make great cameras, and in addition to putting them on drones, which they're best known for, they have things like the Ronin and gimbals for handheld cameras. And you could imagine in the same way that they are, in the same way that they do that to improve kind of cinematography via hardware, you could imagine Skydio doing similar things, but the tech capabilities that make us unique are software and machine learning and computer vision and robotics focused. And so, again, it's hard for me to say what that might look like, but you could imagine analogs in the future where the things that we're able to provide as kind of like adjacent products come from the technical work that we did to make our drones fly autonomously, and help you accomplish whatever vision for footage that you have in your head, translating that to capturing it automatically with this self-flying camera.
So perhaps having some software packs, be a Steven Spielberg, be Francis Ford Coppola, the director, and load that on the Skydio, and we'll film.
Honestly, that is something that we love to talk about. The idea that, you look at stuff like NVIDIA showing off end-to-end trained drone flights or end-to-end trained self-driving cars, where they just show it a ton of footage of good driving, and between the video looking forward from a car and the steering wheel inputs and acceleration and braking inputs, they're able to train basically it can figure out how to drive. You can imagine the same thing of feeding in thousands of hours of Hollywood cinema, saying when you see these kinds of environmental circumstances, get this kind of shot, and then kind of determining what mode you're in based on whose eye are you trying to replicate. I want this to look like a Mad Max movie while I'm filming my car in the desert or something. That's something that we think about a lot, and it's only really possible when you've got, again, an autonomous system that works like ours does, that you're not following some tracker, but you're looking at the world around you and figuring out what makes sense to do based on what you see.
So,
well, obviously, I have the inspection case for that, because for my field of oil rigs that I have in the North Sea, once I've trained, but once you've trained, or Gulf of Mexico's in Texas, off Texas, whatever it is over there, but once you've trained a couple of devices, 4 or 5 devices, they don't have to be particularly big and high end or whatever, as we've said earlier. Once you train them and they know their oil rig, you just release them to poodle around their oil rig all day and look for change in their world. And that, if you get that right, that would be that would just be
Skynet.
I won't respond to that part, because I think Skynet, they never showed the benefits to society from having those machines. They just kind of went from we got robots and now they're evil. When it comes to something like the oil rig inspection case, it's something where it's not just the pain that goes into training a pilot/camera operator pair to go out there and, you know, go around the entirety of the surface of an oil platform. It's that, you know, a lot of times you're shutting down works on site when you're doing this kind of inspection, and the workflows all take way longer than the specific task of flying the drone around, because you have to ensure workers are safely harnessed on site, and they have to maintain line of sight with the vehicle, even though the worst case thing that could happen with a vehicle that only weighs a couple pounds next to a platform like this is that it falls into the ocean. There's just a bunch of workflow things that make it inefficient, take a lot of time away from productive use of the infrastructure that you're trying to make sure is in fit order. And if you just got, again, a flying image sensor that every couple hours is looking, and it costs, you know, the operating cost is basically your electricity to recharge the thing. You know, it's really interesting to think about how tasks that are kind of periodic but not frequent, you might as well do them all the time. And if you're collecting that data, you might as well look for insights that weren't even the initial reason that you were inspecting things. So like on construction sites, you could imagine you're flying the vehicle around to make sure that pipes and outlets and walls are installed in the proper places. But once the drone's already flying around every day, maybe you make sure that, you know, everyone's wearing the appropriate safety gear where they are, and the subcontractor has as many people on site as they were told the general contractor they did, because you can collect that data for essentially free at that point.
Yeah, I have a feeling, and the trouble is, this is a love fest. Come on, guys, let's go with the hate bit. Let's go with the hate bit. Let's line it up.
Then the 8 bit. How did? No, the tricky question.
Sure.
I don't believe you guys have competition in the market. Which established company might feel that is more threatened by you guys?
I'd say that the most obvious competitor is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, DJI. You know, thus far, again, the things that they're really good at, because they've got the tight-knit relationship between manufacturing and engineering, they crank out tiny, solid, well-built, high-quality devices. By kind of our we think that basically, you know, the main limitation is that they made a different set of trade-offs, and that's why, you know, flight autonomy doesn't work anywhere near as well as our, you know, what we call the Skydio autonomy engine, because, you know, they designed for an entirely different set of trade-offs. They made a pilot, you know, it's like an emergency braking system almost, versus thinking like, assume the drone is flying itself default and the operator is just kind of telling it where to go in a general sense. With that said, you know, if you read kind of writers like Clayton Christensen, people who think about the interactions between early startups and later stage competitors, the advantage we have going for us is we can invest 100% in autonomy, as opposed to, you know, we don't have to deliver on the expectations of what a Mavic Pro 2 would be. We don't need to line up with the expectations of how the controller should work, because we don't have kind of those existing customers to satisfy. We don't have the kind of internal politics saying that, like, no, we need to make this thing operate as well as possible when you're manually flying, and the autonomy part, that'll come. To deliver value that clearly stands out from the crowd, we have to push even further on the autonomy and make it do things that people don't expect it to. And so, you know, we really respect them as a competitor. We think that they're the best at what they do, and it is something very different from what we are. But I think that at some point in the future, it's going to become fairly obvious that, you know, this is something of a paradigm shift, and people are going to expect drones to, by default, be operating autonomously.
Well, that was sort of what I was going to push to before Louis did jump into the bad stuff. And I think we possibly are blowing smoke at you guys again, but it does feel to me like this is a big change. This is the first big change we've had in a while, and it's the start of something pretty exciting. But Bruce, look, you've been quite quiet. So, well, Bruce is he's so old. He's seen everything. No, sorry, Bruce.
But you wake me up for a while. Then we could sneeze.
Sorry.
Well, okay.
Skydio's crap, right? There you go. That's out of the way.
Tick that box. There we go.
I did make some notes though. Can you put this thing on an umbrella that follows you around?
So it only supports. That's hilarious. I think we had a conversation about that in Slack the other day. No, so we do not support a payload added to R1. There's some interesting things you could do, but it looks like we're going to have a cap of about 100 grams. So you can't think of any usable umbrellas that get under that amount, unfortunately.
You mentioned Skynet. Do you get much of a response because you had like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk all saying artificial intelligence is going to be the end of the human race, and here you are building the Skydio net. How do you sit on that one?
Yeah. Basically, we do hear that a lot. There's a lot of Black Mirror comparisons. The thing is that what we have our heads down focused on is kind of nowhere. Like the reality is just so far disconnected from what people are concerned about that, you know, it's something that we're actively thinking about. Like, is there messaging we need to do? Are there things that we need to make it clear that we're making these trade-offs to emphasize privacy or safety, you know, the things that people are concerned about of like long-term implications. We want to make it clear to people that we are thinking about those things. The other thing is that like, I think the biggest part of how we overcome that is by delivering real value that people have to talk about, so that people don't see the technology and just talk about the potential implications. You know, show people what you can do with this tiny camera that does the work for you, that has the creative eye or, you know, a facsimile of it. Make people excited about what it'll really do. And that, I think, will take people away from worrying so much about, you know, what a theoretical evil company might do with kind of the same line of thinking around the underlying technology.
Gary's pointed out that obviously you haven't followed the traditional route to get where you are, which is the 3D renderings, the blockchain, Bitcoin, all that sort of crap.
ICO, yeah, Skycoin.
You do score points having artificial intelligence because it's a buzzword du jour, but you don't seem to be featuring very much in the media. I haven't seen much about Skydio in the media. What's your relationship with the media? And as you're aware, media tends to be very focused on the negative with drones, certainly recreational drones. You know, they're going to bring down airliners and kill people and invade our privacy. Have you established a media plan to counter that in respect to your particular product? Because obviously your product does stand aside from the DJI in terms of the way it functions and the benefits it brings. So how are you working with the media to try and, you know, distinguish yourself from the mass cloud of other drones out there?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And I think I bring a somewhat unique take to this because I actually used to be part of the media. Now, 2 jobs ago, I was actually a reporter at TechCrunch. So I'm lucky as a product marketing manager that I know how the press thinks and kind of what they're looking for. And I'd say that we have a pretty good working relationship with, especially the tech media, more mainstream outlets. I think you kind of need to really punch above the noise with drones to catch their attention. And so, you know, with our launch coverage, we had a profile in the New York Times. So doing pretty well on that front. With that said, we were coming from, you know, we kind of had to go 0 to 60 in that we were in stealth for 4 years before we announced R1 or even what we were working on. And so that was something we had to overcome was, hey, we've got this big news. You might not, you know, believe that because you've never heard of us, but really it's big. And that's where we were able to leverage personal relationships with members of the press to, you know, kind of overcome some of those disadvantages we might have had as a company. With that said, I think that the media strategy for addressing some of those concerns is the same thing as how we're going to address those concerns in the minds of customers and users. When we talk to them, it's going to be, hey, here's this new feature, capability, way of using our products that we rolled out via new software. And it does this for people in the real world. You know, car follow, you know, something like a car follow mode. You know, it's a real tangible benefit to users, and it's kind of hard to work out as a consumer device, like what the downside is that they'd like to play up. And so I think that, like, execute well on product, the story will follow, is a big part of how we're thinking about that. And, you know, there's also, I'd say, generally speaking, with hardware, as a startup, it's scary to build a hardware company as opposed to software. Software is nice. You make good margins. Costs you nothing to get a unit in people's hands. It's just bits. But one of the advantages that comes with being a hardware company is that we are going to have new hardware products. And frankly, the press loves to have new gadgets to play with. And so I think that's something that's going to keep us at kind of top of mind is, we're going to be releasing things at a fairly regular cadence. And those new products that we release are going to be huge improvements over what we put out in the past, even relative to R1, which I consider a pretty big change from what people expected from the drone market. We're going to try to do that again and again. And I think that's how we'll overcome the kind of things going against us when it comes to interacting and getting good coverage from the press.
So Kyle, you
was it
a couple.
R1?
Sorry, go ahead, Bruce.
What was it called R1?
So that's, I'd say, a fun story, but it really isn't. It was the internal development name at Skydio for a long time. We went through an exercise of looking at other names, and we thought R1 represented, something that people kind of associated with here at Skydio on the engineering team. It's performance. You think of alphanumeric things, and you think of high-end cameras. You think of, high-end BMW M3 or your Porsche 911 GTR3. Alphanumerics. People have certain kind of associations in their brain with names along those lines. It's tough for me to say in the future, will future products follow that same naming pattern? Like, will it be R2, R3, R5? Or as we hit different form factors, want to reach different audiences, maybe we want to have something that's more, makes you think of birds or makes you think of, family outings. You could imagine going along different lines with naming, but R1, we like the idea that it sounded like something that came off of like a prototyping exercise, and it's like a piece of tech that's like so hot that it's still got a code name.
So will it be a ground-based version called R2D2?
That would be a great way to get some, I'd say, promotional collaboration with a big company like Disney. Like, oh, Star Wars Episode 9's coming out. Let's do something with R2 and R2D2.
They'll just see you.
They'll collaborate with you all the way to the courtroom. Yes.
Yeah. No. The key is to somehow make it win-win.
So Kyle, you mentioned a couple of times the new feature of the car follow.
Yeah.
Are you guys handling the transition from people follow to car follow? That is, if a person that the drone is following gets inside the car, the drone will then follow the car?
No. So we're treating it as different cinematic modes. So the reason that I'll answer this in two parts. So the reason that we have car follow dedicated today is because it switches to a different neural network that represents, or that can recognize people or cars instead of people, but also changes the defaults of how far away does the drone film you from, how high does it above the subject does it default to, because cars are different sizes from people. We can see a car from further away than we can see a person because they're bigger and have such distinct shapes. You're not likely to be in a crowd of cars, or as likely as you are to be in a crowd of people. So it's the combination of, we're looking for something different, computer vision, and there's different defaults of how would you want to film this thing. But
so you're not automatically transitioning between the two modes at the moment?
No, but I think that you're getting to something that we consider an important part of the future roadmap, which is we're making all these claims about being smart and doing things for you and making you not have to think about it. And so looking at the circumstances and going like, what should we be doing? Should we switch to something else? That's something we want to think about, is like, okay, let's say you're on a bike and you're driving in a wooded area, and then the trees open up. It's no longer forest, but a hillside. Maybe you want to switch the camera from being behind you to swinging around and being in front. We want to be able to take in that context and make decisions that lead to footage being better for you. So again, it's not something I can promise, like when we're going to do auto switching between modes, but I'd say it's something we'd love to get to.
Won't it end up looking when you watch TV now? I am getting quite bored of seeing the pull away shots over the trees from a quador, even though it's a super expensive one. Every TV program,
it's like we get it. This used to require a helicopter. Now you've got Inspire. Fine.
Yeah. Oh look, there it goes out the door. Oh look, there it is. Oh look, looking at it's already getting a bit dull. Won't you end up with similar footage? And then I'm going to have two questions now. In the comments, do you use stereo camera setup? Does it use visual inertial slam or just visual slam? And that's from Hemag. I'm sorry, I'm never going to pronounce your name right.
Yeah, so really quickly on that question from the crowd. So we're doing visual slam to build the map, but part of how the vehicle works out its position and part of the motion planning process is also doing visual inertial odometry. So looking at the frames from the camera plus what the IMU says, fusing those together to get a sense of what am I doing, where am I? So building a 3D map, but we're also taking advantage of VIO.
SFM?
So I don't know that off the top of my head.
Structure for motion?
Oh, yes, that's definitely part of the approach as well. With regards to footage all looking the same, I'd say that comes from the fact that the way drones are used is it's like a tool in your belt. You use it when you need to, you're trying to set the scene, and it's a great way to show the environment characters are in, or that, you've gone from one setting to a next, in terms of visual storytelling. I think that what will make R1 footage continue to feel unique relative to other drones is that we are not going to, in the near term, it is definitely like a tool in your belt as a creative, but in the long term, I think we want it to basically let you do things with a camera as an individual or a small team that previously would have required an extensive crew and lots of filming equipment. And so I think that you're going to see tools that we release that are essentially, hey, we let you put a virtual dolly down here, virtual track, let you do shots that look like they were done from the ground, but instead you defined it in software in a couple of minutes, and you're able to do it a bunch of times and reset the shot as many times as you want, and it just works. And so I think that, yeah, basically what it's going to look like is R1 footage is going to move from today. It's a lot of this kind of following you through an environment footage to we're automatically capturing footage that looks like it was shot from the ground by a crew. And we're doing that because we have this strong understanding of the scene and can make it so you can kind of get these consistent shots based on kind of placing it within the environment and trusting it to do the exact same shot as many times as you need.
Who's going to buy you out? Sorry. Who's rushing not to buy you? Someone must be.
So I will not answer directly, but I'll say that before working at Skydio, I was working with the company from the outside in that I used to be a venture capitalist myself. I worked at Andreessen Horowitz, which invested $25 million into the Series A in fall 2015. Before that, they invested in the seed round of Skydio. And the perspective that we had as investors in Skydio is that basically, while an exit is interesting, there's definitely candidates among the big companies, among the incumbents in the space, among aerospace companies, defense contractors. There's a pretty wide set of folks who could use robust autonomy that works in a variety of settings. I think that people here are investors. We're all aligned behind, we want to go big ourselves. Like, we think that having the level of autonomy we've built enables a deep roadmap of creative tools, of scalable commercial and industrial tools. And, our autonomy kind of serves as the basis of a platform that will kind of touch all these different use cases. And so basically, we'd like to take a serious go at doing this ourselves and building a big, impactful company independently. I think that's what we're shooting for. And so it's not that there's not potential acquirers out there. I just think that that's not something that's top of mind for us.
So, can I finally ask something?
No.
Yeah, please jump
Things,
in.
actually.
Yeah.
I want to get back on that topic of, shooting a scene through the eyes of that guy or another guy. And overall on the topic of shooting something, because basically you've got an autonomous flying camera. As far as I can understand, I haven't really looked into this in more detail, but you can only control it via a smartphone, but can you directly fly it, or does it only have autonomous flight modes?
So we do have a virtual joystick mode where you, like a video game on a mobile device, you've got virtual sticks on screen that let you fly manually. We keep the obstacle avoidance enabled. So basically it's like flying manually, but you've got a bubble that's about 1 meter in radius around the drone where it tries to not hit things. That's really great for public demos, by the way. I love demoing for like dads who come out to see it in person, and then they have their kids, and the kids are desperate to fly it, and the dad doesn't want them to take my phone and fly the $2,500 camera, or sorry, excuse me, now $2,000 camera, because they're afraid of, like other drones, you hit the wrong button and it destroys itself. But then the kid, I say, no, let them take my phone, let them fly it. The 7-year-old flies right at a tree, doesn't crash. That sells the parent. The fact that even manually you can't really do damage to this thing. With that said, to get to the point that I'm sure you really were getting at, are we going to have joysticks? That's something that we hear. Yeah, that's something that we hear a lot. You just want the specific, the tactile feel, for this amount of input, I know exactly what the camera and the drone are going to do. We hear that. We definitely see that as something that we want to provide for people. Unfortunately, I can't say what form that's going to take or when, but it's something that we know and we want to address for people.
But potentially that controller is, I'm guessing, going to have or at least enable a longer range, more freedom of movement of the drone, not only 20 meters above your head, following close by, dodging trees, which is on its own, it's pretty impressive. I'll give you that. I mean,
yeah, no, I'd say that today, without that kind of robust manual control, I'd say some people would argue that R1's almost kind of like a single purpose device, and having manual joysticks would kind of expand what you'd think to do with it. So like with the benefits of tactile feel, knowing what you're going to get from input of a controller, we're also thinking about range. Again, don't that I can say like what we would be shooting for, or what, from what we hear, what seems to be what people would want. But range of control from the operator, definitely something that we're going to make radical improvements to, I'd say, both over the course of R1 and with future vehicle platforms.
One thing,
radical definitely sounds good.
You're making it a closed shop like Apple, where you're doing the hardware and the software. Will you have APIs available? Because the one thing I was thinking of here is, what about a third party that develops a joystick device that could connect to your phone through Bluetooth, so then give you that joystick capability for the Skydio by replacing the virtual joysticks with real joysticks? Have you thought of that as part of your plan? Because when you open it up to third-party developers with an API, you effectively offload a lot of the development tasks onto those people.
Yeah, and you also get things like potential network effects, where more people buy R1 for some of the apps that are available on top of it. As the audience of people who own the drone becomes bigger, more developers are attracted to it, or they think to invest more work into improving their apps built with those APIs, and you get this like positive feedback loop that kicks in. That's really powerful. And so, yeah, totally see the potential upside to something like that. And I'd say that, if you look at the technology page of Skydio.com, at the bottom of the page, we say, build on R1. If you're interested in having the most compute and image sensing capability on a drone, Skydio R1 is the best platform for you. And so we let people submit, what they would want to build with R1. So again, I'm like hinting as open as I can without confirming anything.
So you're saying,
yeah, we're definitely thinking about that.
What you're saying is that is going to be a Skydio app store.
How we would package those apps built with APIs, it's hard to say exactly what makes sense. So yeah, I won't confirm what you just asked, but I'll say that
I didn't ask. I just said it. I stated that
Okay,
you guys are going to do an app store.
So one could imagine apps being packaged as part of an app store, but there are other things, so it's hard for me to say.
And one more thing. Now, like I already said, that drone is a autonomous flying camera. A DJI copter is a piloted flying camera. And in terms of camera, because that actually was not something that I heard any information about, I've seen a few reviews. The copter does seem to fly pretty well and to dodge stuff pretty good, but some of the people commented about the camera that they don't really have a lot of manual control, manual settings, or a lot of control on the camera. Also, you know, colors a bit washed out, not a lot.
Yeah, if you look at things like white balance, if you look at things like our default color profiles, I think a lot of the thinking going into launch was, let's make this kind of like a GoPro. The color profile is very similar to what you get off the GoPro. A lot of the defaults that we have at various parts of the kind of camera stack are very similar to what you get on a GoPro from a year or two ago. With that said, we hear, you know, I'd love to customize white balance and ISO and all these things that you get on other products. What's nice is those are things that are doable with software. And again, so it's something that we want to make the hardware that we have available as valuable as possible to people who could take advantage of the autonomy that's so differentiated, and improving the camera for the range of environments that people want to take R1 to. It's a clear win for everyone. And so thankfully we've got a lot of kind of leeway there to do things via software, where the same, you know, camera, image module, lenses, all of that, we can keep those, but still improve a lot of what people are, you know, talking about in the comments or in reviews.
Ultimately, it comes down to regulation as well, doesn't it? Because these things are regulated quite strictly in some countries. And being autonomous, have you thought of approaching regulators for some extra dispensation? Because, like, for example, at the moment, a lot of councils around the world are banning the use of these things in parks, which is the ideal place to use them. You're finding your playing field is getting smaller by the day. You've got owners have to register. You can't, in some countries, you can't fly within 30 meters of a vehicle or a house. And how are you getting around the regulatory nightmare that is basically constraining what you could do with this thing, especially when you bear in mind that this is an awful lot safer than your Phantom 4 or your Mavic because of its autonomy and its ability to stay away for, you know, keep people safe and keep property safe. Have you got any plans in that area?
I'd say that partially, like, we kind of are going to let the ecosystem do the adaptation that kind of has to happen because of the fact that drones took off. They became really cheap. You know, now that you can buy a pretty good 1080p drone for 25 bucks online, something like that. Drone safety had to get worse before it got better. You put a bunch of drones in a bunch of untrained pilots' hands, a bunch of dumb things were done by people, and so regulation made sense. I'd say that we're probably approaching kind of the low point of people doing dumb things with drones that they just got. And as drones readily available start to look more and more like R1 in terms of their autonomy capabilities, I think that the regulation will shift again. And rather than investing company effort on, you know, showing regulators what safe drones are going to look like and saying, hey, you should give us special rules, I think we're just going to push ahead as much as we can on making reliable, trustworthy autonomy, and having faith that the ecosystem around us will, you know, markets are complex adaptive systems, and they'll adapt around having real autonomy. You know, if construction companies want to use our autonomous drones to monitor sites in progress in France, and regulators don't let it, at some point the economics will, you know, compel them to partake in the democratic process and advocate for those changes.
Democratic takes a very long time.
Now he's talking about democracy. They're mad. They're mad.
That's my turn to check out.
The couple of questions from the comments. Research Air has asked, is the hardware software going to be available for other use applications? So we'll go with that one first.
So I'm also going to have to cut off. I'm a little bit past my time cap, so I'll answer a few more questions from the crowd, and then unfortunately I'm going to have to head out.
Yeah, that's fine.
So to the question from this researcher, I'll say, basically the same thing I said earlier with regards to APIs. We're pretty transparent that building on top of R1 and Skydio autonomy engine are going to be a thing. Can't say much more than that at this point, though.
Perfect. And then when will we see the first version of the R1 with industrial inspection capabilities? And that comes from David. Again, I'm going to try your surname there, David.
Those kinds of applications would be built with a available API or SDK, presumably. So let me get back to you on the SDK theoretically in the future. And then, but I think that seeing construction and other real world applications coming from that will just naturally follow.
Well, look, obviously you've just said you've got to go, so we're going to let you go. Thank you so very much for joining us. We'll continue ranting on. We have picked, as a group, we have picked the Skydio as quite an impressive thing, and we're impressed with what you're doing. So keep on going with it, and we look forward very much to seeing what rolls out and what evolves, and hopefully one of you or two of you or three of you will come back again and bewilder us with science once more. So thanks very much. You can go and have a beer or something.
I thoroughly enjoyed this and your guys' questions, so I'd love to come back, especially as we roll out things that get you all excited. Happy to bring a little bit of context to the conversation.
Perfect.
That'd be helpful. But,
yeah. Kyle,
great talking with you all.
To your right, because I still have to copy some of the equations on the board behind you.
Just move away.
Don't worry, just company secrets. Nothing that important. No. If you could figure out
the payroll calculator.
What these were for, you're hired. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all. Looking forward to future conversations. Appreciate you letting me come on.
Thanks very much. We'll see you again. Cheers, eh?
Bye.
Yeah.
Cheers, eh? Don't talk about. Oh, he's gone. Right, we can talk about him now.
I really like Kyle. He's quite open, and their system, like I've said before, it's perhaps the single most impressive thing I've seen in a couple of years.
No, I agree. Absolutely.
Just wait till you see my version, mate. My video will be out next week for my version of the Skydio. It will astonish you.
Oh, I'm sure it will, and we will expect next week. We will expect your whiteboard full of equations behind you. No, I think it's a change. It's a change in a way of doing business, as it were, isn't it? And I didn't ask a clever enough question to quite unpack why they did wait so long and hit on that point. I think that was particularly brave of them to not jump to market with a load of bullshit.
I think theoretically, I can understand why they did that if they've chosen to learn from other companies' doings, because there were a ton of companies and still are that you see those renderings you talked about, and they promise so much, and you rarely see something come to fruition and seeing the light of day. So as long as they have the resources to do this under the radar, I don't see why they would jump up and announce anything really until the last minute and then actually say, well, you know what? Here's the product. We say and we deliver on the spot. We don't promise, 1 year ahead.
Yeah.
Sort of like what happened with that said Lily drone and a few others that have come and gone, within the past 2 or 3 years on various.
I think the best thing that they have is they had a future vision. They just not got together a couple of motors and a couple of batteries and put a drone with a fancy camera in the air. They just had an idea and they went through with it all the way.
They've also looked at what the market's demanding. I mean, most 90% of people don't want to fly a drone, but they would like a flying camera. And they've gone for that 90% of the market. The people who don't want to learn to fly a drone, just throw it in the air and let it follow you around, take pictures. They have been the only people who really stood back and said, where's the big market? Where's the money? And that's why they've done it. Also, I think they've been so well funded. Obviously, they've got plenty of venture capital in place. They have their seed capital, they've had venture capital. They don't need to go out there and start selling a dream. They can go out and start selling the product.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then we've unpacked that they had we heard that one of the founders was a champion aero modeler. So then he'll have the right set of thinking for the flying part of it. And 10 years ago, they were working on aircraft flying in car parks. So, they've got a great pedigree. Was it that they reckon overnight success takes 10 years, don't they? Something like that. Yeah, no, very, very, very impressed. Look, we went over the hour as well. He did very well. He did very well there. And it's so annoying. Why are all these youngsters so flippin' clever these days? Bloody millennials. Anyway, what else were we going to talk about? Bruce, did you have anything else what else were we going to chat through tonight?
I see SUAS News scooped the pool again with its prediction of those UK drone rule changes, because they've been officially announced. And I've already done a rant on that, so I don't have to talk about that anymore. And then there's the FLAM thing that we spoke about earlier, where it seems like FLAM could be a pretty good option actually for this whole basically conspicuity issue. It's gradually growing in use.
Well, and Open Glider Network is the open source version of FLAM. It's one slightly different frequency, but the same message format. And for $35, you can build yourself an independently powered independent tracker. I mean, if we're going down this route of requiring RPAS to be transmitting their position, like the French with our flashing lights and other such things. But personally, I just think just get all manned aircraft with ADSB, and we can get out of the way of them. It's very easy. it's not a hard one.
I think we need to push regulators too to have another category for airprox reports, which is unidentified object. Rather than calling all things drones, we need to force them to say, well, this wasn't identified as a drone, so it's an unidentified object. Then the drone stats actually have some meaning. But at the moment, they have no meaning at all.
Did you see that? I think it was an MD 500 following one of those. Like, is it the Baja
rally somewhere?
Raha rally.
Hit the tail rotor and no.
Didn't see that. No, fair enough. But did you? I didn't see an in-flight video of boom. There it is. All I saw was a video of them putting it on a trailer with some damage on the thing. So there's no actual.
Exactly. Did he whack a tree branch or something? We don't know. But of course, if there's any damage, it's got to be a drone. But yeah, I don't know. In fact, if it was a drone, helicopter hit a drone, helicopter landed, nobody hurt. Another point which shows that hitting a drone doesn't necessarily mean death to any helicopter that gets involved.
Well, whatever it was did bounce off the tail rotor as well. So I have emailed them and blamed you and said, look at his video here. It's plainly him. He's come across.
It was my Skydio.
Yeah, it was your Skydio. Oh, there you go. Well, yeah, and did anyone else see anything else? Because we're already over time.
Well,
just that umbrella drone. That was cool, eh?
That's been done before. That's been done before.
But I saw that. I thought that is so stupid. They put the drone under the umbrella. If they put a fan on the top, they could use the Coanda effect to produce a low pressure area that would provide far more lift than the drone would.
Yes. Yes.
No idea about aerodynamics.
God. Yeah, just make it a bit heavier so it's more robust as well. Have a 100-kilo structure hovering above your head.
It reminded me of the cone of silence in Maxwell Smart.
Yeah.
Yes. Do you remember that Coanda effect thing? I can't remember what it was called. Again, about 10 years ago, it was quite a popular idea and hit all the magazines and stuff. But you could just never, once it got over, it would only go so fast every time. But
well,
anyway.
The Hill Flying platform, apparently more than half the lift that produced was due to the Coanda effect on the lip of the duct. Not so much the actual reactive force of the air flying down, but the low pressure area formed around the duct.
Yeah, well, that's another 50s thing, It's our world of reinventing things here, isn't it? Nicola, you look like you were going to say something then. Wasn't sure. Oh, looks like Louis is as well. Any marks, get set, go.
Silence.
Sure, not sure. I mean, you talk so much, I forgot.
Yeah, there is that. There is that. Louis frozen. All right. Well, if we don't have anything else, we've gone 20 minutes over the hour. Thanks very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much, dear viewer, and thank you very much to Carl Russell from Skydio. we liked that, I think. I look forward to seeing everyone again, 2100 GMT next Tuesday. And who knows what will be in store for us then. Everybody have a safe week. And if you're going flying this weekend, have some safe and happy flying. Cheers for now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.